Hi, I'm Femi OK. Welcome to the stream. Today we're talking about extreme weather linked to climate change. And I'm sure you've seen reporters on this network and elsewhere talking about unprecedented weather conditions and never before seen. And let me remind you, never before seen weather conditions like this. Let me remind you of a couple of things that I pique my interest as well. Australia fires, record breaking. Battle not yet over against the locust invasions in East Africa and Yemen. Another extreme weather story linked to climate change. And another the California fires, the West and US fires there as well. The reason we're talking about this is because the 2020 State of Climate Services is a report that is out by the World Meteorological Organization talking about climate change, connecting it to how we can better prepare for extreme weather because of climate change. I know you have questions. I know you have thoughts. This is why we have YouTube. You can jump into the comment section and be part of today's show. But first, the weather.
Hello, good morning everyone. It is indeed Tuesday and you can chuck away that big coat. Today we have a blast of milder air moving towards us. Keep the freeze-hold hairspray handy though, it's going to be pretty windy. But this warm air is just flirting with us, my darlings. Colder air returns then over the next couple of days. Of course, we all love the finer detail and you can get that by downloading the BBC Weather app. Stay safe, I'll see you soon.
Of course, we can't have a weather show without talking about the weather with a forecast. That, by the way, is not the forecast for Tuesday. If it is Tuesday where you live, that is not a forecast. That was pre-recorded earlier. Let me say hello to the guests. You just saw Owain. Owain, introduce yourself to the global audience. Go ahead.
Hi, Femi. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. And also thanks for telling us that wasn't the forecast for Tuesday. It's very important to know. I'm Owain Wyn-Evans. I work as a weather presenter for the BBC. And a big part of what I do as well as being a TV weather presenter is kind of trying to make the weather a bit different and I suppose a bit more engaging as far as perhaps younger audiences are concerned, like that clip you just saw there. So science, communication and weather is a big part of my job.
Looking forward to hearing more about that. Hello, Sally. Tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sally Potter from GNS Science in Wellington, New Zealand. I conduct research on how people respond to warnings for different hazards, but including impact-based weather warnings.
Welcome. And Audrey, nice to have you. Tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Great. Good morning, Nimbula Vinaka, and hello, Femi, and thank you for the welcome and good morning to colleagues. So my name is Audrey Olmore. I'm the Deputy Director General of the Pacific Community, which is a science and development organisation based here in Fiji, right in the heart of the Pacific.
Can I start with something that may be controversial, guess, and that is, I think most people, unless they're pilots, sailors, extreme gardeners or farmers, have no idea what the weather forecast means, and they're just looking out for the icon summary at the end. Am I wrong, Sally?
I think to some degree, but then I think people have their own thresholds in their mind as well as to what that weather means for them. So if I get a forecast for 100-kilometre-hour wind gusts in Wellington, New Zealand, I know that that's not really going to affect me very much. Whereas if I just got told it in terms of the words in an impact forecast, I might find it less possible to personalise it to me. So there's lots of challenges and whether you should include the hazard, as in the wind gust speed, or the wording of the impact itself.
Oh, and you're nodding. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, everything that Sally said then, I agree with. I think that it's relative almost, the weather, depending on where you are and what's happening in a forecast. Because if you're doing a forecast for, let's say, the whole of the UK, the weather varies hugely across different parts of the United Kingdom. And I think that now a lot of people, Femi, will just pick up their phone and, will have a look at the app and we'll see what's happening. And is that all you need? Well, I still think that there's a lot of value to adding a person into that mix, somebody who can tell you a bit more about the structure of why the forecast is presenting itself in that way. And, things have moved on. The weather forecast isn't what it once was. I think that we have got, the technology is so much better now. So for a science communicator or a meteorologist to be able to give that a bit of extra value, I think that is where video-based forecasts kind of come into their own.
I want to play for you, Audrey, Cheryl Nelson, who is a broadcast meteorologist, and see what you think about what she had to share with us a little bit earlier. Here she is.
When communicating weather events to the public, you really want to make sure you start with the who, what, when, where, and why. It really goes back to basics because the viewer wants to know, how is the weather going to affect me? How is it going to affect my family? What are the impacts going to be? Why should I care? Those are all so important to talk about and get that information out there. It's also crucial to tell the facts, stay calm, and make sure you're not hyping the situation, because all hyping is going to do is cause fear and confusion, and that's not going to help get the weather story across.
Multiple agreement there. Audrey, you go first.
Yeah, so it's such an important message, and let me just put a little bit of context around the region that we live in, and the reality is for us is that weather events are a common phenomena for the Pacific. In fact, the majority of the countries in this region are really high on the risk register for both cyclones, tsunamis, and so forth. And when we're talking about communicating weather events to communities, the language, as colleagues on this show have already shared, is really critical. And the majority of our communities in this region live on the coast. In fact, probably 90% of our communities live not too far from an ocean or a river and so forth. So the reality is that when we're communicating events of so forth, the language becomes incredibly important. And it's not just really, I think, what the weather is going to be like, what it is that we can expect. But for this community in this region, we really are starting to talk a lot more about what the weather will do to us, what's the impact that it's going to have on our communities and our lives. So descriptions are sort of, and no offense to Owain and others, but descriptions around what the weather is doing is really not good enough any longer. And we really need to start to take shape of the language that is actionable, that is about impact, that is about how do we scribe for our communities who live on these coasts in this really vast region of an ocean, that you really do need to move, pack up, shift your animals, pack up your chickens under your arm and run for life and cover, rather than to describe potentially what weather it looks like and what it may eventually be like when it hits your shores. It's really about actionable information for decision making for many of our communities in this region.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting hearing that, Audrey, the weather in your region is so widely different to what it's like here in the UK. But on a similar note, as far as tone is concerned, the forecast you just saw earlier on is very kind of flamboyant and camp, and that is me. That is the kind of presentation style. But one thing that I've noticed over the past few years is that what I've dropped, and I know a lot of weather presenters have dropped now, is any kind of tone of celebration when we get a prolonged spell of hot weather, like a heat wave, because that is absolutely no reason to celebrate. And whereas, even 5 years ago, maybe people watching this now are thinking, oh yeah, actually, if we got sun and warm weather, that's a reason to celebrate, where I think people are a lot more clued up now on what's happening with the climate, and therefore that language is kind of gone. So it's all about tone as well. And especially when we're talking about warnings, which I know that you both are probably more well-versed in as far as severe weather is concerned than I am.
So let me just bring in the YouTube commenters right now. They're watching, all three of you, enjoying the conversation. So Eric the Inventor says, I love how they, forecasters and weather presenters, throw in a percentage chance of rain just to give us some hope. Owain, why do you do that? I know the answer, but why do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And it's one of those things that in the past I've kind of thought, what does 20% chance of rain look like? Does that mean that I'm going to need a raincoat? Does that mean I can just risk it? And of course, weather forecasts have got much, much more technical and much more detailed, than what they were even a couple of years ago, Femi, as you know. But yeah, it is what it is. There is a chance that this will happen, because often if you have frontal rain coming in, there's the likelihood of it affecting you or you seeing that rain is higher than if there's, say, showers in the forecast. And, this isn't a crystal ball. This is still data-driven stuff that is produced by a computer. So I guess that's why we use the percentage.
So I love that you said that because, go ahead. You go first. I'll go second. Go ahead.
I was just going to react to Owen's comment, and I think you're right. The science is absolutely critical. But one of the things that we've learned in this region in particular is that science and community practice, particularly in messaging, is really important. So we are using the science, that is part of the meteorological world, but we're needing to deeply translate that into practice language, into actionable language that I think probably better fits the way our communities live, and it's a behavioural thing. So this is something that we've been exploring and practicing in this region a lot better in recent times.
This is Nadal Antar. Nadal Antar is in Amman, Jordan, and he was commenting on an unusual weather event which brought snow to Amman, Jordan, a little while ago. Again, this is not current weather, everybody, so don't panic if you're watching in Jordan right now. This is what Amman had to say about his forecasters.
My opinion is that we can no longer trust these channels or weather forecasts. Over the past 2 days, we have been on guard and we stayed home, but I don't see any road closures or any other issues. Everything seems normal. Previous snows that they did not announce ahead of time were worse than this.
Sally, so here's the issue. That weather is not an exact science. It is a science, but it's not an exact science. All sorts of things can happen between the forecast and when that weather or extreme weather event happens to you. But does the public appreciate that?
Yeah, it's a very much an interesting question, because the resolution that the weather modelling can get down to at this stage, you can't forecast for extremely localised weather and impacts. And so when your region gets a warning, it might actually just be for the mountains nearby or for the next area over and not you. And so you get this warning, but you personally aren't actually affected by it. And so therefore you might perceive that to be a false alarm. And so it's a pretty tricky challenge for the weather forecasters. And that extends to whether impacts are getting communicated as well. So if you say the impacts of this event are going to be, flooding on the streets and that kind of thing, it might be for that next area over the hills, not for your particular area. And so it's an ongoing challenge that these forecasters have to face. But the science is improving, and this is why they put those uncertainties in as well. Just pretty important. It means people can take that into account when they're looking at one of these forecasts.
And I'm just going to give you a little bit of a behind the scenes view of what Sally was saying about modelling. Many, many years ago, you had to be really good at mathematics to do a forecast, because you have to do sums, basically. You have to do maths and do adding up and algebra and all sorts of things to make the weather actually work. And then you use that maths to then do the forecast. Long story. Now we have computers, and the computers will put all of that data together. They crunch it, and they will tell you what the forecast will be. And it's probably more accurate than somebody with a pencil and paper doing that forecast, but it can change quite a bit. Owen, did I get that right? Owen, did I get that right?
Absolutely, Femi. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
And we get several runs of a weather model every day, because it's always kind of crunching that data and trying to see how it can improve itself. And obviously, most of the time, the closer we get to the event, to the time in question, the better the detail is. And as Sally said just now, the resolution of these models and of the weather data is really good now. But to go back to the video message that we just saw, which is about snow, and that is not a region that I forecast for, but snow is also, really hard to forecast. And that's not me as a weather presenter saying, hey, we got it wrong, sorry. It is what it is. Snow can be a tricky thing to forecast. So I think
because Owen, because why? What makes snow so difficult to forecast?
Well, if you have, here in the UK, for example, a few years ago, we had something called the Beast from the East, which was a storm which came in, it met colder air, and that's essentially what you have to have in order to get, a lot of heavy snowfall here in the UK. It's cold air mixed with some kind of precipitation, rain, low pressure, weather front, and then you get snow. But the boundaries of where those things meet and where the temperature contrast is, these are tiny little details that can have a massive impact on whether or not a person is going to see snow, as well as altitude. So that's one of the reasons why snow is so hard to forecast.
I'm going to take you from the UK to Hawaii. This is Joshua Stambro, and he is making the connection between those everyday forecasts, the forecasts that Owain is doing, and then the impact of climate change on those everyday forecasts. Here's Joshua.
So people see climate change impacts as far off or distant, but they're really not. We're already seeing heat waves. We're seeing rain bombs here in Hawaii. This is where weather communicators can really help. Using terms like unseasonably warm or unusual rainfall, unfortunately makes it look like an anomaly rather than part of a broader climate pattern and picture. So we're looking in a rearview mirror at what's happened in the past rather than looking out the front window at the climate projections and how those weather patterns fit into that. So predicting weather day to day can be really hard, but putting individual weather events into the larger climate story isn't, and we've got to get that right.
Audrey, are you getting that right in Fiji?
Yeah, so this is such a critical issue, and the point that the previous speaker just made is a big deal, I think, for our region. Climate change is a significant issue for the Pacific. We're seeing, of course, significant sea level rise. We're seeing the impact of pests and diseases. We are seeing communities being impacted along coasts and so forth. And as Owen was talking earlier, I was thinking of a really interesting example that happened recently here. In 2015, we had a Category 5 cyclone. It hit the country of Vanuatu, and of course we knew it was coming because our weather forecasters were able to tell us that a cyclone was coming. Loss of life, significant damage. It was a really major event for the region. What was really interesting is that the waves that came off that cyclone hit another country 1,800 miles away, huge tidal surges, which again devastated that particular country. It was the country of Tuvalu. Had no idea on a bright sunny day the impact of this particular cyclone hit another country. And so weather impact forecasting, I think, plays a huge role, of course, in the Pacific, because it's these kinds of events that we need to understand better and have, of course, message out to communities in a timely fashion so that we're able to create actionable messages for communities. And for me, it was a really prime example that we can do weather forecasting really well, but we actually can't anticipate the impact of particular weather events if we don't have other tools and other scientific innovations that help us mitigate other types of risks that we haven't anticipated.
Guess I'm going to just jump into YouTube again. Yeah, you go ahead. YouTube will wait. YouTube, stand by. Go ahead, Sally.
I was just going to say that this climate change issue is going to be quite interesting when we do bring in impact-based warnings, because the models that we use need to be adaptable and they need to be able to take that climate change into account. We know that the intensity of cyclones and hurricanes is increasing with climate change, and so
Sally,
we need to have those.
Sally, we made a pledge earlier that we were going to use language everybody knew. So sometimes, if you're in the world that you don't have a cyclone, but you do have hurricanes, you don't realise that a cyclone and a hurricane are exactly the same things. They're big tropical storms.
That's right.
Intense ones. Carry on, because we made a pledge. We were like, everybody was going to understand this conversation. Go ahead, and I've got another one for you on YouTube, just standing by.
So typhoons and cyclones and hurricanes, all the same thing. That's right. So they're all getting more intense as the temperature increases around the world. And so, we have to understand not only how our meteorological models are going to be improving and adapting to this over time, but also how exposure and vulnerabilities and capacities are going to be changing over time because of climate change.
All right. So this is Blazing Stars, who was hanging out in YouTube. Blazing Stars says, isn't climate change just the weather? So who wants to volunteer to, in a one sentence, explain the difference between climate and weather? Owain, thank you for volunteering.
Well, climate is the long-term picture, if you like, or if you were to get, a chunk of information and spread dates out over that, I would say that is climate, whereas weather is what is happening now, short-term. And this is why, weather forecasts look at the here and now and how it's going to affect you over the next couple of weeks. And we do have long-term forecasts, of course, which tend to be a bit less accurate purely because it's so far off. But climate, you're looking over a much longer kind of scale, essentially. Would you two agree that that is right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the impact of climate change in this region obviously is much more than weather, as we are a region, of course, that is at the front line of climate. So it's not only ocean, sea level rise and so forth, but a really interesting example in this region is, of course, ocean warming. And, we talk with developed countries about reducing greenhouse gases and so forth. And a direct livelihood impact, of course, with oceans warming for us, of course, is the devastation of our coral and our biodiversity in the oceans, but also our livelihoods, such as fisheries. We've seen a huge impact on our fisheries and our fish economies, where with the oceans warming, our fish are starting to move further away from traditional fishing sites and making it harder for people to, of course, manage livelihoods and so forth. So much more than weather in a general sense.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe I just did the distinction between weather and climate as opposed to weather and climate change, which actually is what the question was. And yeah, climate change, as you said, Audrey, is so much more than just weather. I mean, weather is just a tiny facet of what it will affect.
So let me move on a little bit. Remember, we started this conversation because the World Meteorological Organization, which is part of the United Nations, they've put out this 2020 States of Climate report. And so Laura Patterson is from the World Meteorological Organization, the WMO. And Laura was talking about this idea of having better early warning systems for our extreme weather. And this is what she wanted to show us. Let's have a listen.
Weather and climate disasters are increasing in frequency and intensity as a result of climate change, and it's often vulnerable communities that are most disproportionately affected. The WMO's 2020 Climate Services Report highlights that despite this, only 1 in 3 people globally are covered by early warning systems, and there's a global insufficient capacity to translate early warning into early action. And to support this, the WMO recommends moving towards an impact-based forecasting approach, which is not forecasting just what the weather will be, but forecasting what the weather will do, to help action be taken on the ground to prevent the worst impacts of these events.
Audrey, go ahead.
Well, it's something that in this region we are doing a lot of work around. We are using multiple different ways of science and technology, from oceanographic tools such as buoys, wave modelling, tide gauges and so forth, including drones that manage, help give us information around coastal inundation and so forth. So the combination of a range of technology is helping us get better information, better data that allows us then to translate that information in a more customized way that we can then transfer that information to communities who then can make decisions about their own livelihoods, about their own safety, about the risk that potentially is coming. So impact-based forecasting is absolutely critical. And I think if we get it right in this region, where we've got 30% of the world's ocean that we're navigating and protecting and keeping safe, but we definitely don't have the meteorological information that we so desperately need to protect lives in this region.
Sure. Oh, and I feel that you kind of live by impact-based forecasting already.
Yeah, so we get our weather warnings here in the UK from the Met Office, and they go from yellow, amber, red. And the impact and likelihood are the two things that are looked at on the impact matrix, if you like. And, I think that it's obviously very important here because we do get fairly severe types of weather at different times of year around the UK in different ways. And I think that people listen to the warnings, Femi. I think that people get what the weather warnings are and what they mean. And it's our job as communicators to delve into a bit more detail. And, people know that if there's a red warning, that's going to affect people in severe ways, and that could potentially be a risk to life.
Thank you so much, Sally and Audrey and Owain, for talking weather with our international audience really appreciate you. And also not talking weather, but also talking about extreme weather events, how they link to climate change and how we can better prepare for them. The conversation is wrapping up here on the stream, but I am taking it to Instagram via Instagram Live. Have a look here on my laptop. We're going to be with Ndoni Mkunu, and she's a climate scientist and social entrepreneur. We can talk weather even more on Instagram Live at 20:30 GMT, and you will find that conversation there from Monday. Thank you, guests. Thank you, YouTube. See you next time.